Dr. Jane here. I want to tell you about an extraordinary story. It's not mine, it's Ryan's story. And for years, I've wanted to get on film what I experience every day. I was thinking the other day that I have around, over 55,000 hours of being in an experience with people where they're transforming. I get to witness that, and it is such an extraordinary experience that I've wanted you to be right there with me. I think almost all of spiritual development is about letting go of something, moving it away from you so that you can emerge in your divinity, in what I call your divine intelligence. I really think this is an extraordinary opportunity for you to see what it's like to go through the process. And that was my intent. I wanted to share with you the impact it can have on you to experience this yourself. Join us, won't you, for Ryan's story.
Hi, Ryan. I'm so excited about this
Yeah.
coming off, and so I'm so appreciative of you being willing to be this open and this vulnerable.
I am too. I really just want people to understand what this process does and can do for them.
It's so valuable to getting the process out for people to witness it. So I'm eager to get started. So I know when you first started, you came, kind of like everybody does, with, you wanted something to happen in your life differently than what it was happening at the time.
Yeah.
And, people come to me for, they want to make more money or they want to be healthier, relationships, all that kind of stuff. What did you arrive with?
Well, and it was a challenge at first because I feel like I live a really happy and productive life.
Yeah.
But what really surfaced for me in kind of taking the assessment part was that I really felt like I wanted to experience a deeper relationship with my family and my friends. And I know that comes from somewhere within.
Sure.
But that's what surfaced for me.
Was really wanting that deeper relationship, more of an emotional relationship with people, especially family. Yeah, that's profound. I think relationships are kind of the essence of what brings us happiness. So wanting to develop that, I think will just benefit you in many ways. And you're so smart. One reason I'm so glad you're the one that's doing this is you've already got so much training in knowing that our life is created from within us, and you believe in all the quantum physics stuff and I'll introduce a little of the neuroscience, but it's going to be an exciting trip. So let's get started. So we know what your goal is. You wanted to better that. Now, how are we going to measure that, though?
And once again, that's kind of a challenge because how do you define that? And so what I started to think about was, it's a balance. It's spending quality time with them is what was really important with me, and not isolating myself, finding friends and people to do stuff with. So I measure it in the form of events and activities. What am I participating with them in? And how often am I reaching out and being frequent in pursuing those relationships with them?
Yeah.
So I kind of came up with some goals that I wanted to set forth. This is how many times I was going to communicate. This is kind of the breakdown of the logic for me of who I choose to put into that field. And that's kind of my metrics.
How'd you keep up with it? I mean, did you literally have a chart, or did you just write?
Calendar.
Okay.
Calendar. I looked at all the things that I've got going on in my life, and I started to realize I'm not budgeting time with them.
You're not making it a priority.
Exactly.
As far as your time. And that's cool that you even had that realization. Well, so if you were going to, if we were going to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being, what you want to end up with, that deeper relationship, and 1 being, I don't really have much as far as depth in relationships, what number would you put on it when you started this?
Honestly, Jane, I think probably in the lower scale, the number that pops out to me is a 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense, because you have productive relationships. It's not that you're not, involved with people and everything, but you just wanted to go to a deeper level.
Yeah, and I felt like it's something that's I have good relationships in certain places, but I wanted to open up to more. So yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. I like the fact that you decided to start with your family, because that's where it all begins. And so
I had a feeling about that.
yeah,
I had a feeling.
you had it right on there. Well, good. Well, okay, so as you got into it, and I talked about it a lot in class, and you began to hear about some of this. So the commitment, it's huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but it's interesting because it's what you want, and then there's some other thing that prevents you from doing it,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and it was a realization of that, really, because I see the other people that have come through the class, and I have people that I know personally taking the course, and they say how great it was for them, and they really see a transformation in their life. And yeah, the commitment, I'm just like,
Everybody's always kind of looking at me like, really? You want me to do what?
yeah.
Exactly. Well, I guess the greatest commitment is that I ask you every morning, first thing, to write for 20 minutes. And it's huge because you really can't just fit that into your day. You have to get up earlier. For some people, me, I have to then go to bed a little earlier. But how did you wrestle with the writing every morning, the time commitment?
Yeah, that was another challenge. And I started noticing, because when we first started, and you talked about having to do this writing experience, the thing that I had to realize was, what was I doing in the morning? And another part of my brain says, well, you can do it some other time of the day, but I know
Absolutely.
specifically
Yeah.
it's really capturing the essence of who I am in the morning time. That's important.
But it is tempting to push it back.
It is.
Yeah.
And so I looked at what I was doing, and I would spend some time in the morning on social media. And so I had to
Sure.
talk to myself and negotiate and say, look, that I'll do later on. I'll give up this in the morning so I can spend some time writing and reading and really dedicate myself to it. And I think probably after about 2 or 3 days, it got easier for me.
It's hard at first, isn't it, to give up something?
Yeah, and to be honest, I was just writing little short quibbits, and my mind automatically went into, well, how can I make this an automated 5-minute process instead of a 30-minute process, which that's not the point.
No, but
And so I had to allow myself that space and say, no, 20, 30 minutes it's important to commit to the time, because I don't know what I don't know, and this needs to be part of that education.
Well, when I was designing the course, of course, I designed it for me, pretty obvious, that you do something that you need. So I remember thinking, I wish I'd had some quality time with my parents, and I didn't get that. And so what I saw my life being like is I never gave myself time either. As I was growing up and got into a profession and life got busy, I didn't have any time with myself. And so I thought, if I really value and I want to switch around being of value and importance to this world, I've got to do that for myself. It's kind of the challenge of the course is nobody's going to do it for you. You've got to do it. So after a few days, then you got kind of used to the schedule, and still though the writing was what you put down was kind of hard.
To be honest, it was all over the place, and it was that way for maybe about the first month.
I think that's normal.
Yeah, and I could start to recognize certain things that I would say over again.
Yeah.
And it didn't have anything, I thought, to do with my goal, but it was more like just my emotions throughout the day, because that was one of the things. I write a calendar, and I love being scheduled and organized, so it's easy for me to put a checklist of things to do that day. But to write from an emotional standpoint, that was different. And so it did offer me some insights. And, after I started with an accountability partner, it really did help out a lot too, because I was able to share those insights with that person.
Oh, that's cool. Is there any insight you could share that would?
Yeah, I mean, for the first part, what I noticed is how much I was emotionally charged driving to work.
Okay.
Because going into the office, there was just a culmination of, did I remember everything? Oh, you probably did, and you're gonna do it again, and you know what, this person said this 3 days ago, and that's how you should have helped with it, and da 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 da.
That dialogue we just
Yeah, and then I would notice that, certain patterns would show up throughout the course of the day. Like when I was left alone, I felt more able to just focus on the fun things that I like to do, and I was really just productive in those areas. But then when I started to be around people, I would get this emotional charge again.
Interesting.
And that's what started bringing up when I first started writing, because it was just a noticing of it.
So the observer viewpoint that I required to write from third person was kind of put you out here and you could kind of observe it.
And that was the other thing that really helped me too, because I stumbled on writing I statements.
Yes.
I felt this way about Billy today, blah, blah, blah. But, writing from the third party perspective, it was challenging at first, but then I start to grow to love it, because it was like I was writing this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I could kind of observe this character named Ryan, And I would sometimes I would look back and go,
why did he do that?
oh, he should have saw that coming.
Yeah.
And then there was other parts where I was like, wow, that's really incredible.
Yeah.
That part of the story was
I love that
great.
part. When you really get to see yourself and start to even enjoy yourself.
Yeah, that was incredible.
I like it. Well, then we're kind of set to move into that first dialogue. And so if you remember, it was about remembering what you were like as a kid in a positive light. I think I asked you to do what I called a positive anchor, to remember some examples of times when you felt like you were kind of before you met your parents.
Yeah.
A lot of times for people it's riding a bike or doing something that you were just having fun in, and you kind of forgot about the world. Those when we're in the flow, kind of. So what did you remember?
Well, it's funny that you say the riding the bike was one of the experiences, but the main one for me was a time when I had to make a presentation in class, and I really spent a lot of time on this artwork that I did.
Yeah.
And I showed it, and everybody just was in awe and loved me for it. And I remember, a day or two afterwards, people still coming up and giving me, yeah. And so that became my really solid anchor point. But I also remember the times riding the bike or my first car, driving down the street.
Yeah.
And it brings up this sense of freedom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I still get it when I ride my bike today, that,
Yeah, and
everything I want.
the part with the class was it gave me a sense of acceptance. It was acceptance for my talent, and they really were praising me for having a gift, and that's what made me feel important too.
Yeah, and it's like then the world comes along and takes that away from you sometimes, that validation. It teaches you, well, maybe you weren't so good at that or this.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're dealing with as far as chipping away some of that debris that landed on you as a result of experiences in your life. So that's exciting. So I think if I remember right, I told you to just hold on to those positive anchors, because in dialogue 2 we were going to dive into some negative experiences, so you could, in your mind, you can go back. If you got down in energy, you could go back and think about, well, remember riding my bike or getting that art project so many compliments, so you could kind of bring your brain back.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the whole points of the course is to keep your emotional set point high, or to even raise it from, we kind of ask you what your norm is from a scale from 0 to 10, and then we hope that the course teaches you how to pull that up a little bit, because we know we create things that we want through the energy, the vibration, the frequency that's going on in our head. And if we get emotionally into love, fun, happiness, excitement, we raise our frequency, and we're more likely then to be able to communicate our energy to the field and have an open view, and the field can see us and gives us back what it is we're putting out there. How'd you do with the emotional set point?
Well, going in and finding those experiences was really profound for me too, because what I came to realize is that I had issues, not necessarily with my parents, which I was thinking, but I found it a lot with my siblings.
That's a good point.
And coming up as the youngest of 6 brothers and sisters, my brothers had taught me a way of love that I carried a lot throughout my life. And so when I started to uncover some of those experiences, it really took me to those depths, and I felt such emotional charges from them. But I really did enjoy the anchoring point, because when I got into that situation and really started to let myself process it, it was interesting, because I would go back into that memory of the freedom of the self-reliance and the acceptance. And it helped. It helped me to get back up into that level, and then come almost from an observer standpoint and dissect that experience a little bit differently. And it brought up a lot of questioning the story around it,
Yeah,
Really
it makes
did.
you wonder what really was going on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, in dialogue 2, we go into kind of the 3 parts of your life that influence your thinking the most. It could be how you're brought up in a religious context, and then your family is, like you said, parents and siblings influence you, because that's who you're around the most. And then, you also have the time and place where you were in history and time. So what did you uncover had the most, and plus school, I didn't add that in there. So what did you discover, had the most influence on you?
Well, the religious aspect, the religion that I grew up with, as a kid, it confused me. And I think I've got this stigmata around it.
Okay.
And so that was one of the areas. Definitely, I would say the family experiences. And one of the things that I really did enjoy was doing the part where we put the factual timeline in comparison to the emotional timeline. That really helped me to kind of go through these experiences and see, oh, well, this happened in this year in sequence with, this factual date.
Good point.
And what state of mind was I in? And I can kind of correlate different experiences and why I got into different situations. Religion, for me, around the age of 13, the age where I was rebelling, it was interesting, because as I was graduating high school,
Right.
I was finding that I was hanging out with the alternative crowd, and I wanted to really go and impress them and be known in that circle of influence.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And it was an interesting thing, because I noticed that was right around the time that I was starting to get groomed to be also something in the religious culture that I was in. And so that conflict of interest started around that time, and that was really key. And I didn't really put that together until I actually did the correlating timelines.
It was kind of a conflict of what your true self really wanted to do, and then what you'd been taught was the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
Religion. Yeah. So kind of backing off and observing it again gave you insights into it.
Yeah, and I started to realize, wow, that's around the time that I started to create my own identity and my own belief system.
Sure.
And some of the beliefs that I pulled from that are still around today.
Yeah, people tell me all the time, well, I've worked through those beliefs. but as they find them and uncover them in our exercises, I think they maybe known about some of them, and then some of them are just like, whoa, I had no idea that was there. But even the ones that, you've known were there, sometimes they're still what I call hot. They still create that trigger in you that you react to certain things a negative way, or positive, depending on what it was. Yeah. So in Dialogue 2, I always help people with what I call a rewire. And so we take a memory and then we pull out a limiting belief. So is now a good time to see what happens with that exercise?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So then if your goal is, as we go through the course, I always want to check in, you're wanting to have better relationships with your family. So let's start with some memories very distinct about your family that maybe we can use to kind of pull out, okay, what is it that really you learned out of that? And the reason we can use memories to find your limiting beliefs, because people always say, well, why are we going backwards in time, when I've already done that in therapy, or why would we waste our time? And it's because the way the brain wires. And so if you have something emotional happen to you, either good or bad, your brain says, let's remember that. And especially the negatives, because the brain is about protection. So it says, okay, so that didn't go very well. I'm going to create a limiting belief to keep it from happening again. And there you go. Then you start to use that over and over again, and it becomes literally a part of your brain. So what's the first memory that comes to mind when you think about either your parents or your siblings?
Well, one that came up for me that was a surprise during the morning writings and during that process was there was an experience where I had that my brothers and I would often play games, and the games just never turned out well for me.
Okay. And how many brothers did you have?
I had 2 other ones. And so the one experience that I can isolate is there was a time where I was running through a doorway, we were playing a game, and as I ran through the doorway, they had a blanket up over that, and I ran through it, and they smothered me in the blanket, and they rolled me up, and they tied me up in it, and then they hung me upside down in our unfinished basement. And I just remember that feeling of scared, claustrophobia. How could these guys that I love so much do this to me? Yes. And so that was one of the experiences that I had.
Scary stuff.
Yeah.
And how much was the fear there for you?
Oh, it was past level 10. I was extremely petrified.
How old were you?
I probably was, it might have been 5 or 6.
Oh, wow. Looking back on that, what was that little boy thinking about? I know what he was feeling was terror, but one of the things you said is, how could they do this to me?
Yeah.
I thought I could trust them.
Mm-hmm.
So did you begin to change your level of trust with them?
Absolutely.
I mean, you never
And
had
it
to.
kept continuing. I mean, it wasn't just that one incident, it's a cycle of those things happening over time.
So because you were the youngest, you got picked on.
Exactly.
Well, as a bully, really.
Yeah, and I was the butt of the jokes in the family, and so when it come to the Thanksgiving or family celebrations when we get together, the jokes would circulate around me, and so that's where I feel like my limiting beliefs of I'm not accepted here as who I am, and I don't trust these people.
It had to be that to have that happen to you. So you began to develop some limiting beliefs, and this is kind of how we design a list. So one of them is, if I can word it, but you help me word it, sometimes you can't trust the people you love.
Yes.
Would you say sometimes or all the time?
Sometimes.
Because you actually had times you could.
Yes.
Okay. What else comes to mind that you filed away as a truth?
One of the things that came up was I am not accepted for who I am.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I can't be who I am.
yeah, and self-validation came up a lot. You know, I want to be validated for the talents and gifts that I can bring.
That's probably why that artist memory stood out for you so much. So nobody had ever done that.
Absolutely.
Actually, it'd been taken away, that you weren't valid.
Yeah, and in essence, I was taught that, you know, having a logistical career, going traditional routes of education and things like that were what I was supposed to be, and that my artistic and my creative side wasn't a real way to show up in the world. And so that created a lot of challenge. And so you're absolutely right. When I was admired and praised for having those gifts, that created another experience. And that is why that's one of the bigger anchor points for me.
Absolutely, because you weren't getting it. So that's probably why you remembered it was unusual.
Yes.
You know, you weren't getting that from any other way. What about you said you thought, the first thing you mentioned was religion was impacting on you. Tell me a memory of something that happened to you related to that we could look at some limiting beliefs from also.
Well, one of them that correlates a lot, and I remember this vividly, was when I was in Sunday school.
Yeah.
And I remember asking the teacher a question, and they in turn just kind of brushed me off. And I felt that even as a young kid, that they were just trying to tell me what they thought I wanted to hear, and they weren't really validating the truth of what I was asking.
Interesting.
And so I didn't feel like I was a part of that community as a kid. All the other young boys and girls I didn't connect with, maybe as far as like building friendships. And later on, when I became a teenager, I got even more distant because I wasn't a part of their group activities, and I started hanging out with the other alternative people.
Yeah, so you really didn't feel like you fit in.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I felt that I couldn't trust what they were saying because
Yeah, sure.
For me, my brain also works. I had a lot of questions, and I felt like what they were telling me was just made up.
It's like you had a curiosity that they squelched and just said, believe what we say.
That would be a good way to define it.
I love it though that you didn't let that go. You somehow in there somewhere you held on to it and thought, maybe I'm right here, or I am right here, whatever it was that you did with that. What do you want to tell that little boy you were? If you could go, tell him something right now, what would you say to him?
I would tell him to trust his gut instinct and go with his heart.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful. Because he was really taught to not trust his heart, wasn't he?
Yeah.
What does that bring up for you?
I guess connecting with that child in me and being able to say that brings up a level of forgiveness, because there was a lot of years where I grew up not trusting myself, not feeling accepted, and not trusting of others.
Sure.
And so that follow your instinct and trust your heart is something that makes me feel that freedom again.
Oh, that's a good point. But it feels just like getting on that bike. All of a sudden I'm me.
Yeah, and I feel like that's who I was as that child. I was free. I was very free.
Naturally that way.
Yeah, and I was excited to learn, and I was excited to trust people. I wanted to be friends with people.
You were openly loving and kind.
And I feel like that's what the inner child would say to me right now.
What?
The same thing. Just trust who you are and trust your heart.
Have you ever been disconnected from that inner child?
I feel I have. For a large part from the teenage years all the way up until later 20s.
Okay. Well, what was it like during that time period?
It was very numb. I was self-medicating a lot, using alcohol and drugs,
Yeah.
getting in trouble with the court systems.
So you kind of, that rebellion of you can't pin me down seemed to get you in trouble.
Yeah, but also I was functioning at high levels too, because I was also really good at sales. I was really good at managing teams. I was really good from a logistical standpoint. I felt like I was following a lot of what I was taught to believe about how to show up in society, and so I took a corporate job. But there was the alternative me that was just beating myself up and self-medicating so I didn't have to feel emotions.
Yeah, because it must have brought that little kid's feelings up, like almost like him saying, "Wait a minute, I'm still in here. What are you doing?"
Yeah, and there was that other side of me saying, "No, go back in your room. You're no longer needed."
Yeah, just dishing it more.
Yeah.
Telling it to shut up, go away. Yeah, I think that all of us hope we can still stay in touch, but society kind of teaches us to go do something else instead of be that person. So I'm glad on one point though you kind of held on to it at least through, it sounds like teenage years, until it just became overwhelming that you had to do something different or you weren't going to be accepted in society.
Yeah, and you know, it came through a lot of emotional outbursts, late night phone calls.
Yeah.
From
From your parents or something? Or
well, calling family members, but being angry, and very disruptive to myself. It was just very charged. I was just angry. And so it did come out in a lot of negative ways too. I pushed people away. I became very mechanic and robotic like when I was talking to people, non-emotional in relationships.
Yeah, sure. That's when you just shut down of that.
Yeah, I didn't trust anybody. I didn't feel like I was really accepted in intimate relationships, in friend relationships, in workplace relationships.
Yeah.
I felt that I always had to conceal things from people, you know.
About who you really were.
Yeah, about who I was and about my inner thinking. I didn't want them to know what my plans were.
Did you have to shut down your creative self?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's almost like you had to just do away with it.
Absolutely. I was working in a collection agency that I helped to start.
Wow.
And then I went from that to selling products that I didn't really enjoy, that weren't like life impacting for me. And so I had a series of jobs that really were just unfulfilling, and that was a big part.
You were getting the paycheck and fulfilling that part of life, but it's all.
Yeah, and I would get the money, but then I would spend it on things that would feel like it was letting out my creative side, like travel.
Yeah.
But when I would travel, I would go to like experience things, but there wasn't a real sense and level of enjoyment, even though I would do it.
So it took the joy out.
It did. It absolutely did.
It did. The freedom, that feeling that you were joyful, it just kind of stole that from you.
Yeah, and through that course of time, I was doing some really fun and amazing things. But it wasn't until I could get into a career or something that really got my creative side out that I felt actually fulfilled, like I enjoyed life again.
Good point.
Yeah.
Got back to yourself. Tell me more, just a little bit about that anger, because that sounds like that was a very significant emotion in your life at that time.
Yeah, I think that's what made me feel secure, because the anger gave me the justification to push people away. It also was a weird sense of trying to find chaotic people.
Interesting.
You know,
what do you mean by chaotic people?
Well, people like intimate relationships, I would always try to find people I could help fix. And that showed up a lot. And then I would become angry and discontent with the relationship.
Sure.
Or it would start to work, and then I would feel like sometimes I would sabotage it because for whatever reason.
It just really fooled around with your relationships and
Yeah.
kept them from flourishing.
And in turn kept feeding that anger. And so the anger was always a big
building
part
up.
to the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, if you could talk to that anger right now, though, what would you tell them?
I think the honest thing that I would say is that you no longer serve a purpose in my life. Yeah, I think is what I would say to it.
Can I share with you something I was thinking about the anger? I don't know if this fits, but when you mentioned that, I almost thought it was a way you saved yourself in a way. I don't know if that makes any sense, but if you hadn't been angry, you would have really settled. And so that anger was kind of like a way that you could not let go totally of who you were.
It's interesting that you say that because I think the anger gave me a voice. And so when I wasn't accepted, that anger came through me, and that's what made me stand up and tell people, no, I am going to be here whether you like it or not.
Even though you didn't present it in a way that you admire, the anger really was about protecting you.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you see the benefit, because I think people look at anger as a bad thing. And the way we use it sometimes can be, but when we feel that welling up of anger, it's really about us saying, wait a minute, somebody or something happened here that was not okay with me, so it really is important to listen to. And I'm glad you did, because I think if you hadn't had that, you might not be where you are today. You might have just still be in the oblivion of, whatever you can do to take away your emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, we all go there, whether it's drinking or eating, whatever it is we do to distract ourselves from how we really feel. Then you just get caught up in that and your life just goes on like that.
Yeah, and I feel like the anger, now that you're bringing it up, it was a savior for me. Mm-hmm. It did help me out in a lot of areas. And I feel like there was such a need for me to hide that little boy inside behind that anger, because that anger version of me could deal with the world in the way that it needed to show up. And over the course of time, though, obviously I found that being that way hasn't served the best of purposes in my life, because it pushes away people. It wants to be very protective of who I am and what I'm doing. And so I've started to see that there's a need for some type of balance.
Well, how does this relate, what we're just talking about, to your goal of, having better, deeper relationships?
I think it's allowing people to talk to that inner child in me, to let the inner child out more, possibly.
Risk it?
Yeah, because there's some sense of arrogance with that anger version of me. That wants to tell people what they're doing and what they're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that shelters from that inner child in me of being authentic and just experiencing moments with people, raw and unfiltered. And so, yeah, I feel like that's how it kind of correlates with my goal. Is I want to be able to experience more of the authentic experiences with people without having, I guess, that anger version of me always being present and overlooming the conversation.
Yeah. So then it's almost like you invite your joy back, because I think I could see how your emotional set point would go up if you could put that anger kind of somewhere and not be led by it so much. Then, you could have some joy back too.
I think that's a part of it, is that I want to bring that joy into the experience. I want to feel like I'm celebrating more than I'm trying to fix something.
Yeah, going against something.
Versus the resistance. I want to feel more like I'm in the flow with them versus a resistance.
Yeah, I can see how your life could come together once you started really accepting your creativity, because from what I know about you, the work you do, you're a very creative person and it's your life and it's what you get joy from. So denying yourself that, could bring a lot of shutdown feeling.
Yeah, and I can see points in my life where I did that, and I was maybe in certain areas really great, like I might have had money,
Sure.
but emotionally I was just drained. I was always in a negative mood, in a negative place. Yeah.
Well, you couldn't use your gift.
Exactly.
What you were really born to do was to decide.
And it's funny you mentioned that, because some of the things I would spend my money on was like I would go to work in the day, and then I at night would go and do the things I love to do, right?
This alter ego.
It was, and that was one of the things that actually helped me a lot. And I started to realize that in myself, and then I immersed myself into that. And
you found that was you.
yeah, and that didn't start until later on in my 20s. And
you kept it in the shadows. That's interesting.
Exactly, and that's and
I think you've been taught not to bring it up because you get in trouble, or it wouldn't work, or people would not like you, or you wouldn't fit in. All those limiting beliefs we've noticed, so it pushed the greater you into the shadows.
Yeah, and I felt like allowing that to come to the surface, and especially telling my parents and my family that this is the career path I've decided. Whoa. Yeah, it was a lot for me.
But that was a significant event.
Absolutely, it was.
Okay, guys, you know who you thought was here? Well, it's not really that.
Yes. Yeah.
I love it that you could do that, though. That's beautiful. Well, we're going to move from kind of identifying your limiting beliefs, because I want you to make a list of them. We've talked about some of them, but from those early memories, kind of dissect them and figure out what the basic beliefs were. I think we've kind of got the theme of it is that I don't fit in, and my gifts are not appreciated, so hide them. Don't trust people because they can really surprise you and hurt you, And I think that event where your brothers really put that blanket around you, I think that is going to be probably what we call a primal wound. That once that happened, you changed your whole perspective of people in general. So we're going to have to really go into that some and get to that emotion and figure out really how it impacted your life. I think it was big.
Yeah.
That much fear turns you away from love.
Yeah.
So I think your goal is to have more love in your relationship. So we're going to have to go back and rewire some of that stuff. Our next step is dialogue 3, and it's about, you kept calling it your alternate personality, or the personality that acted during the day.
Mm-hmm.
That was really, we're going to name it your conditioning, your conditioned self, and we're going to kind of personify, just to make it more real, that's a part of you too. But the real part of you was suppressed, and yet it began to surface anyway. And we're going to see those two parts of you talk to each other. You were doing that in your writing when you mentioned it when we first talked, and you said, I could hear this part and this part say something, and it was really kind of conflicting. So we'll get into that more, but I look forward to what I call the conditioned self interview, and we'll do that next time we meet.
Okay. Sounds great.
Yeah. Thanks.
Hey guys, just checking in with you here. Just made it out here to my cabin in Mineral Wells, and I'm getting ready for my retreat. So for the next 48 hours, I'll be here going through the dialogue number 5. And I guess my initial thoughts and my initial feelings, even coming out here and creating those boxes, it was a little intimidating, bringing some of those past memories to the surface, and just knowing the emotional charge that I got even creating the boxes. I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous to go through this and really process those emotions. But I know for me, this is going to be a great experience, and taking this time to really give myself this time is something that I know I need. And so, yeah, I'm just excited to get it over with. but I'm more excited to see what the rewards and the benefits will be after doing this retreat. So I'll check in with you guys after I'm done, give you my thoughts about what the experience was like. And yeah, so I'll see you guys in a minute. Just touching back in with you guys. I just got done with my 48-hour retreat. And I've got to say, this was really intense. But probably one of the most powerful experiences that I've had in my life. I mean, to really give myself the gift of sitting down and processing all the things that I had upstairs in my mind. Where did these beliefs come from? Where did these stories come from? Where did this controlled self come from? I mean, to really uncover that gave me a new sense on the direction of my life and what I'm choosing to do with it. My goal is to deepen the relationships with my family and my friends, and doing this part of the course, it really helped me to open up my eyes as to why I chose to not participate as much and why I am choosing now to move forward with a life that includes them and includes a different way of doing things. And I gotta say, there was a lot of emotions, and I was drained for a few parts of it, but it really opened me up to a power within myself, and I really got to listen to that divine intelligence that Dr. Jane is speaking about. And I feel a new lease on life from doing this. I feel like I can really be more of my authentic self showing up in those situations. And so one of the things that I did before I actually scheduled my retreat is I decided to set a goal to be a part of my niece's 21st birthday. Now, I haven't been much around my nieces and my nephews, let alone my brothers and my sisters, and all the events and activities of their life. But I really chose right now and this time and place to start thinking more proactively about doing that. And so this is a part of that experience. This is a part of my change and my transition. And so I got to admit, I'm excited. I'm enthusiastic about meeting up with them. We're going to do some really fun and exciting events while we're out there. And, I really got to give a lot of credit to this class and this course, because I feel like I'm going to have such a bigger experience with this. And I'm going to change the dialogue. I'm going to be able to change the conversation not only with my own internal self, but with my family. And that's a gift. That is a true gift that I have now. And so if you're at that part thinking about taking this class, I really strongly recommend it, because you're going to gain so much valuable insight that it's going to be life-changing. And if you're at the part of the course where you are about ready to go on the retreat and you have some resistance, or you feel like maybe you're just going to escape away and you're not going to be doing it like the other people are going to do it, and you're not going to give it 100%, I got to tell you, you're in for a newsflash, because this is something that's going to make you a better you, more authentic you. The goals are right there. They never disappeared. They're within you to reach. And this course and this class is going to help you to get to them. So, yeah, the next scene you're going to see is me in Las Vegas with my family.